most of the people that shop the Mexican aisles are people that look like me, that, were born in Mexico or their parents are Mexican. And some of the ideas were terrible ideas for me. I would be ashamed of even saying them here. So one of the ideas was a bathrobe subscription service. Why does Mexican food have to be cheap? Why does it need to have fillers? Why does it need to have bad ingredients on it? What if we made a premium version of those foods?
When Miguel Leal was in college, he had the chance to live with his grandma, and it was precisely in her kitchen where he learned how to make Mexican recipes. But as he grew older, he realized that a lot of people who love Mexican food, especially in the United States, didn't have an abuela to show them how to make those recipes. Miguel wanted to change that. He wanted to show Americans that Mexican food at home was more than hardshell tacos and greasy dishes. So he and his co-founders, Daniel Lubetzky and Rodrigo Zuloaga, started SOMOS Foods, a brand of ready-to-eat, non-GMO, and gluten-free Mexican products. Today, SOMOS Foods is the #1 enchilada salsa brand at Whole Foods, and it's available in more than 9,000 retail locations across the country, according to SOMOS Foods. Miguel Leal joins Bísness School to tell us why he decided to sell a company that generated more than $100 million in sales, how being a marketing executive for the salsa brand Cholula shaped SOMOS Foods, and how years working at Kind Snacks, the company behind the popular snack bars, prepared him to launch a new business directed to third-generation Hispanic consumers in the United States. Plus, he answers questions from business owners around the country. I'm journalist Fernando Hurtado, and on Bísness School, I'm on a mission to map one of the fastest growing groups of entrepreneurs in the United States, Latinos. We're tracking how they got started, found success, and the most important lessons they've learned along the way. And remember, Bísness School is expensive. Bísness School is free. Welcome to Bísness School, Miguel. How are you?
Never better. Thanks for having me, Fernando.
I love that. So I have to ask you this question because we're talking about Mexican food today. Thank you for allowing us to do that, by the way. What is your favorite Mexican dish, if you had to choose one?
I'm very simple. I love a really good quesadilla.
Ooh, just with cheese?
No, I actually like it with bacon and avocado. So I guess it's, more of a Mexican, northern Mexico way.
It's a beca quesadilla. We'll coin that term.
Trademark here by Fernando and Miguel.
Live. Miguel, you grew up in Monterrey. What would you say makes Mexican food in Monterrey different from the rest of the country?
Great question. So northern Mexico is great for their access to quality beef. So we are known for our carne asadas. Think of Monterrey being, just very close to Texas and our version of barbecue. And specifically in Monterrey, I love the discada, which you do in a plate similar to paella, a disco, and you just mix different quality of beefs, put together. And it is just amazing for tacos.
And this podcast, we're talking about entrepreneurship and your journey with entrepreneurship. I'm curious, what was your first exposure to the concept of being an entrepreneur in your life?
I come from a family of entrepreneurs, so I saw both of my grandfathers start their own business. And, my dad, my uncles, I'm the oldest grandkid, just looking to them, like all the efforts and all the risks that they take. Some more successful than others. But the earliest that I can remember, I was bilingual from a young age, being close to the border. And my grandfather would bring me in to translate to the people that were installing equipment at his factory. And just thinking of the risk he was taking, buying this, equipment that failed from a business in Europe and bringing it to Mexico and hiring people to do it. I was in my early teens, and it was just so impressive on me. It just really dawned on me the risk and reward that he was taking.
What kind of business did that grandfather have?
So my grandfather made industrial equipment, so a lot of B2B. He made car batteries for different auto manufacturers, and then he also made tires for forklifts. The brand was Tolteca.
So you had that early exposure to entrepreneurship, and right now you're on business school, but eventually you decide to go to business school with that different pronunciation. Why go to business school, and why the Wharton School of Business specifically in Pennsylvania?
It was interesting. I studied engineering, and originally I wanted to follow that path and go to engineering graduate school and eventually get a PhD in engineering. But I took a year off after college. I went to work on a mission in Sonora, Mexico, and my roommate at the time was studying for the GMAT. And he is the one that convinced me. I owe him that piece, but he said, you already checked the engineering box, and the more you go up in ranks and the more that you develop your career, the more you're going to need other disciplines to round you up. And it just clicked on me that I would be so much better to achieve my mission with a business degree on top of that engineering foundation.
I was watching a video the other day that said that the most important financial decision we will make in our life is who your partner is or who you marry in a lot of cases. So I know in your case, you ended up making that decision or meeting who would become your partner in business school. Do you remember how you met your wife?
Yeah, no, I remember it constantly. So we were going to school to Wharton, and I had a lot of guy friends from Latin America, but I had a lot of friends back from home, girlfriends that went to study to Georgetown. So they would come and visit us in Philadelphia. My roommate and I would leave our apartment and they would stay with us. And after 3 or 4 visits, we would go to concerts, to dinner, etc. They said, why don't you guys come down to DC and visit us? We'll do the same thing. We'll leave the apartment. It's restaurant week. We will have dinner, go dancing. And one of my friends from business school went to undergrad with my wife, Jeanette, at Michigan. So he invited her. He said, hey, do you mind? I have this friend. She's a gringa, but she speaks perfect Spanish. She knows how to dance salsa. Can I bring her? And I was like, yeah, the more the merrier. And there was this huge table, 16, 18 people, restaurant week in Washington, D.C., January 2021. And I just saw her and it really struck me. She is still so cute. And I immediately grabbed a chair and asked her if she wanted to sit next to me. And I guess 25 years ago.
I was laughing a little at the beginning of that story because I realized I asked you, do you remember how you met your wife? But I meant to ask, do you remember the day? I wasn't trying to get you in trouble. I would hope, and it's clear you do remember how you met your wife. That's a great story. So after business school, what do you go on to do? What's that first step you take?
Yeah, after business school, I actually started my first company, which was a packaging company. I was following my girlfriend at the time, now wife, career. She was the main breadwinner of the two of us, and she was a consultant for Accenture. So I just decided that I needed to do something else, kind of to support her on that. And I started a company. It was a paper company, packaging. We made food packaging for Subway. So if you think of the paper that they put in the oven that doesn't burn, and with its similar food grade papers for McDonald's and Carl's Jr. and Jack in the Box and that kind of thing. We eventually grew the company. It was quite successful. We grew to over $100 million in sales, and we sold it to Georgia Pacific, and that was my first, kind of a step into entrepreneurship.
Georgia Pacific, that's the one we see in restrooms, right? Across the country. Am I correct? Yes.
That is correct. Yeah, it's part of Coke Industries. And they bought us. They were to your point, very, very heavy in tissue paper for restaurants. And then now we were bringing them all the other specialty papers that they could sell to the restaurant base.
So that company was called Select Product Group. What did you learn from running Select Product Group? And I imagine one of your first real experiences with entrepreneurship and running the ins and outs of a company.
Yeah, one of my two partners on that business, Bobby Cheney, I was just starting my career. He was already had decades in the industry, and he gave me some really good advice that to this day it's like top of my playbook, which is never burn any bridges. So his stories were of people that were buyers when he started his career, eventually became CEOs of these restaurant companies, and the importance of he's like, you're not gonna bat 1,000. Sometimes you're not gonna get the deal. But every time, even if it's positive or negative, it's an opportunity to build a relationship. And I truly believe that's one of the best pieces of advice someone has told me. And the other piece was always position yourself to be the first call. Even if you're not getting the deal at that point, when the buyers always have a supplier that they trust, that when they get into trouble, another supplier doesn't deliver time, etc., who do they call for help? Be that person and you'll never go broke.
And after you sell Select Product Group, what do you do? Like, I think that's such a chapter closing, but also a chapter beginning. You could do 5 million different things. How do you decide what your next play is?
Well, as you can imagine, the multiples on paper companies are not, the multiples on Google. So, we made a little bit of money, but not enough to retire. So I had to work. Also, we already at that point had Anna, my daughter. She's 18 now. She was a newborn at the time. Jeanette, my wife, had decided she didn't want to be in consulting anymore and wanted to become a yoga instructor. So all these things played a role. All of a sudden, not only I was a dad, there were three of us. I was the main breadwinner. Yoga careers don't pay what consulting careers pay. So it was like a lot of pressure on what I was going to do next financially. I originally wanted to start a restaurant. That's really what I wanted to do. I love food. I love entertaining people. And I went to play golf with a business school, colleague of mine, Jeremy Bjork. And I told him that I wanted to start a restaurant. And he said, it is the worst idea. It is the hardest job to succeed. You have zero experience. He's like, why don't you come and work with us at Frito-Lay on brand marketing? That's what you went to school for. And then wait for your non-compete to expire, make some relationships, and then go back and start another business. So I joined Frito-Lay as a brand manager after being, the COO of my own company. I was the lowest person of the marketing organization, and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I love food. I work with really smart people that to today are some of my best friends. And, I am here today with SOMOS because of that decision.
And help me understand something that I've always wondered, and maybe this answer varies for everyone, but I wonder a lot about stress levels because I hear about people who run companies and I can only imagine the amount of pressure that comes with that maybe the decision fatigue, you're constantly making decisions. What was it like switching back to, a corporate environment where you still play a very important part in the company, but you're not necessarily responsible for the overall health per se of the entire company? How did your stress levels change in that transition?
I mean, Fernando, you nailed it. I mean, we were always constantly running out of cash. Paper, raw materials would go really up in price and our margins would decline significantly. And we were always putting out fires. We had, one of our plants was in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and then the plant manager resigned and I had to move myself with my wife and my newborn child to Green Bay in the middle of the winter. Super, super stressful times. Then I get to Frito-Lay and I need to do a P&L and there is an expert in finance that come in and I need to take pricing and an expert in pricing. And this is all people with MBAs, super, talented. And I could not believe it. I mean, honestly, it was like a summer camp. And when you're an entrepreneur, especially starting a paper company, you don't get to hire, out of, the best business schools in the country, but Frito-Lay does. So all these people that I was sitting with, ended up being super interesting people that, to this day, they are part of my network. And to your point, my stress level I felt like I was in summer camp. I could not believe I was getting paid to do that job.
It was almost like a business school part two, in a way.
Yes. But getting paid instead of getting in debt.
There you go. That's a better exchange. And then eventually, though, you decide to leave Frito-Lay. Why?
It was a geography thing. I think a lot of time people ask me, what is your worst career mistake? I felt like I probably should have stayed longer with Frito-Lay. My wife is from the Midwest. We had been in Texas for a while, and she just wanted, to get out of the hot summers of Texas and move closer to her family. So it was really the driver of the decision. Frito-Lay is one of the best organizations, and probably, if one of my kids wanted to go into business, I would send them there for a second MBA. And but we moved to New York, work at Danone, same thing, great company.
And tell me about that time. It's a very different product line in many ways. What did you learn from your time at Danone? Is that how you pronounce it? Danone? Danone?
Yeah, Danone. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, it's Danone in Mexico, but Danone in the US. Super interesting. One of the things that I love about working at Danone was they are 100% health driven. They had owned a cheese business and a beer business, and they just completely got out of that and bought Stonyfield, eventually bought White Wave. Like they really wanted to become the first CPG health company. And that, after that, I only work in health products. So they had a big, I would say, influence in the rest of my career. The second thing, it was a global company. So, operating in 160 countries all over the world, the US, not that US-centric, not that US-dependent at the time. So just to take best practices from other countries and implement them. And one of the most interesting things that now I use at SOMOS was, in the rest of the world, drinkable yogurt is 90% of the category. But in the US, it's less than 5%. So how different are taste palates, when you go all over the world? But it ended up being the shortest time that I've stayed at a company, I think, because the next opportunity that came along was super interested, but it was a super enjoyable and great learning time.
Tell me about that opportunity. I think I know which opportunity you're talking about. How does that come about, and what makes it so appealing?
Yeah, so after that, I went to Diamond Foods, first as VP of marketing, then president of snacks, and eventually a CMO of the company. And it was the most transformative experience that I had. I was very lucky. A friend of mine from Bísness School joined the private equity company that bought and did that deal. And it was a turnaround. The company was in trouble. They were trying to buy Pringles. They had some issues with the, SEC in terms of earnings. It was just cleaning up, growing the company, growing margins. And it was my first, time working with a financial sponsor, which I've done every time since there, but that was the first time that I did it. And it was a great deal. We came in at a valuation of $300 million, exited at $2.1 billion. That company is now part of Campbell's, or is part of Campbell's Snacks. And yeah, just tons of learnings. I managed, my most success was with the Kettle Chips brands, which was a big part of the natural food and snack ecosystem. And really, it's the one that changed my career. I was a director at Danone. I ended up being a Section 16 officer at a publicly traded company with a 7x return on that deal. So it was just incredible for me, professionally, financially, and personally.
I think that's business school part 3 there. We're going through the many business schools that you've had to go through. Can you tell us who Daniel Lubetzky is?
Yeah, so Daniel Lubetzky is the best founder in food. He started Kind Bars 25 years ago. He's also a friend of mine. We've known each other for 15 years. And he's also my co-founder in SOMOS. So we are doing this project together.
And how do you remember, when you first met Daniel?
I met Daniel when I worked at Danone. So when I worked at Danone, Daniel was starting Kind. I believe he was on year 3, on year 4 of the brand. And I had the idea to make a cup of yogurt that would have granola on top. You see that now all over the place, but this is 2008, 2009. And I thought the best product in the market was Kind. So I reached out to Daniel. At the time, there were not a lot of Mexicans doing food CPG, and we were both in New York. And he gave me, the time. I went and I met him. And I remember that day coming home and telling my wife, I met someone that is unlike any other person that I ever met. I just love, Daniel wrote the book on the intersection of business and society. He not only wrote the book, but did it on a $1 billion plus company. And we could never get that project off the ground. I think, moving things inside a global company, $30 billion in sales like Danone was not as fast as doing things at Kind. And eventually I left to do the other job, but I maintained my friendship with him. I just thought he was incredible and would eventually be a great mentor for me as I was starting my career. And that proved to be the case.
And tell me a little bit more about that, because we do a lot of research for guests for Bísness School and finding people. Now in 2024, when we're talking with you, it's much easier to find people. It's an embarrassment of riches. There's so many founders out there. But back then, what was it like to see not just another Latino, but a Mexican founder, not just having, his own business, but really thriving and in a lot of ways innovating and, as you say, writing the playbook for how to run a business in that sector?
It was interesting. Definitely, it was very inspiring. I would say that, Daniel is probably the most influential business person in my career, after 15 years of knowing each other. But I also, at the time, it was the beginning of Kind. So I didn't get to see him on year 10 and year 15, enjoying all the success that we had. I saw him, really working hard. And I not only saw, what he was doing. I think Kind was maybe $20 million at the time. And, it's now over $1 billion. But I saw all the sacrifices that he had to make. His offices were not the final, Kind offices in Times Square. They will have to make their own chairs, and there were 3 or 4 people crammed into an office. And I saw the truth of entrepreneurship. So then, as we maintain our friendship, and I saw the incredible success that him and Kind had, I could always go back to that initial meeting and realize, not only, to your point, all the benefits and all the, influence, and I would even say how just incredible journey he had, but also all the sweat and tears that he had to put in it to make it a reality. So I was not only lucky to have met Daniel, but I was incredibly lucky to have met him at that point.
And Miguel, your career intersects with a product and a brand that I think is ubiquitous, and I literally ran into it yesterday. I saw it this morning in my kitchen, and that's Cholula. What was it like working with, especially in that category? You're talking about a sauce. What did you learn from working with Cholula?
Cholula influenced the work that we're doing with SOMOS, because I think, the most important thing that I learned from that brand is that people are interested in quality food from Mexico. If you go all the way back to the Mexican aisle, most of the products that Mexico will send to the U.S. would be for first-generation immigrants. There were, most of the people that shop the Mexican aisles are people that look like me, that, were born in Mexico or their parents are Mexican. And what I saw with Cholula was that it was 87% bought by mainstream consumers. And it was also one of the most expensive, hot sauces at the time. Truff was not as mainstream as it is today. So Cholula sat at the very top of the price range with Tabasco above Sriracha, and to see how much the same way that people embraced a decade before premium tequilas and all this, people move away from the cheap, $10 tequilas to $100 bottles of Mexican tequila, that the same thing was happening in food, that people would pay for that extra quality and extra ingredient. And then, being Mexican food didn't have to be cheap, didn't have to have fillers as ingredients. And that was just like a huge, huge eye-opening and a point of pride for me. I was the only Mexican on the team in the US, and I just felt like it was amazing that product, not only could command those prices, but also past Tabasco in demand in the US.
And you were CMO at Cholula, right?
I was CMO. I was the head of marketing, yes.
And then in 2020, McCormick acquires Cholula. How was that experience for you to see another very ubiquitous logo and brand come in and express interest in Cholula?
I love that. I mean, we had been working on a relationship with the McCormick team. We always thought that Cholula, McCormick would be a great home for McCormick, and that, ended up being the case. They paid a premium for the brand, and I've maintained, a lot of contacts with the people at McCormick, and they've really done a really good job. The brand continues to grow, continues to gain share under their ownership. And at one point, we just knew that Cholula had to be a global brand, that this phenomenon that was happening in the US, not only with hot sauce, but with premium quality Mexican ingredients, will take over the world. And when you see that as the next chapter for that brand, I think McCormick, would be top of the list for making that happen.
Right. I want to get into the story of Somos, but before I do that, I want to make time for other people to ask you questions. And those questions are from Comcast Rise Award recipients. So Comcast Rise supports the growth of all small businesses and individuals committed to uplifting their communities. Rise has awarded more than $125 million in monetary, marketing, and technology grants to businesses all over the United States. The first question today is from a beauty company based in Maryland. Let's hear what she has to ask.
Hello, my name is Erica Bigger, and I am the founder and CEO of Holy Gloss. If you're building a team for the first time, who should you hire first and why?
Thank you for the question. That is a great question. So I can tell, the story of Somos as an example, but I am very commercially driven. Most of my career I have spent in sales, marketing, and innovation. So I wanted to bring someone that would complement me. Additional, Somos supply chain is very complex. We source all of our ingredients in Mexico, and we bring the products to the US. So it's an international supply chain. So my first hire for those two reasons was supply chain. I would recommend that you look at your business, and every business is different depending on your route to market and the complexities, but also take a look internally to what are the things that you bring to the table and bring someone that complements those skills that you have.
The last question is from a business in Michigan that provides media training and coaching services to business owners. Let's hear the question.
I'm Ami Burrow, the CEO of LA Inc. Publishing, and I want to know, what funding options do you suggest for early stage entrepreneurs?
Yeah, that is super interesting. I would say that the first thing generally that I recommend to everybody, but I think it's especially true the next couple of years, with interest rates and terms being the way they are in the market, is to bootstrap as long as possible, that you try to self-fund and try to maintain yourself for as long as you can. Giving out equity and taking debt is very, very tough, and you will get much better terms if A, you have proof of market, and B, you have prospective distribution. The second stage that I would go to would be outside equity investors. If you are in a position that you can put together a friends and family group I know not everybody's in the same boat, but that seems to be, a really great place to start, because it's people that know you, that want to be part of your journey, and you're not only going to get funding, but you're going to get a partnership to continue growth. And a place that I think a lot of the time doesn't get enough press is debt. We have an amazing partner on our asset-based lending. Even as a startup, you can get a lot of finance without warrants from your inventory and your accounts receivable. And I feel, a lot of time that gets misplaced or overlooked by founders. But that would be sequentially the third place that I would go to.
Thank you to those Comcast Rise Award recipients for those questions and for those answers, Miguel. So now I want to get into SOMOS Foods. Tell me, where does the genesis for SOMOS come from?
The genesis from SOMOS goes back to the Kind days. And when we were in the process of thinking of the next chapter for Kind, Daniel, Ellie, and I, would spend a lot of nights together just working on the different options. And one of the things that we had is that we had built this incredible team and culture at Kind, and how sad it would be when we were no longer working together. So we would start pitching ideas, the three of us, to each other. And some of the ideas were terrible ideas for me. I would be ashamed of even saying them here. And
you gotta share some. You gotta share some. You gotta share at least one of those ideas that didn't make the cut.
Okay, so one of the ideas was a bathrobe subscription service. That was probably the worst idea. Daniel had just came back from vacation. He had a robe that he loved. I'm like, hey, you buy one robe in your entire life. Why would you need a subscription service? And finally, I don't honestly remember who of the three of us came with the idea for SOMOS, but we said, hey, why does Mexican food have to be cheap? Why does it need to have fillers? Why does it need to have bad ingredients on it? What if we made a premium version of those foods? And I remember Ellie saying, if you guys ever launch that, I would be your first investor. And she did. She wrote us our first check. So 5 years later, we were launching SOMOS.
Wow. And what I want to be clear about here is exactly what the idea was, because you weren't necessarily coming for Mexican restaurants per se. You weren't trying to compete with restaurants. You were really zeroing in on at-home cooking. Was that from the beginning, that vision to make products for the home?
That vision was for the beginning. We would go out to dinner a lot, and we saw how much Mexican food changed in New York City, from Taco Bell to Chipotle, from all the great birria taco trucks that are now, even Michelin star restaurants like Cosme were coming out in the scene. But then the Mexican shelf was exactly the same as it had been for the last 20 years. And we were like, well, one thing doesn't look like the other. We need to close that gap. And that was the idea.
And one of your interviews, I read that you were specifically going after, and you just said it, not necessarily after those first generation Mexican immigrants, but more that second and third generation. Tell me about exactly why that sector, but also talk a little bit about your experience with your grandma. You got to live with your grandma while you were in college in Mexico. How did that shape your vision of people's relationship to Mexican food and cooking Mexican food?
Yeah, so two, different stories, but I think now that you mention them like that, they do come together. But when I was in college, my grandfather passed away, my paternal grandfather, and my grandma was going to live by herself for the first time in her life. So I offered to go and live with her, ended up being, almost a year that I spent with her. And she would cook everything from scratch. She was, old school Mexican grandma, just took so much pride in her cooking. She would go and buy things fresh every day, the tortillas, the beans, everything, and just cook it from zero, and it would be delicious. And then back to the other side of the story, now with SOMOS, my thought was that they are great brands for people like my grandma. But the reality of I see my kids that are second generation Hispanic, and, many of my friends that are come from multicultural families, they are all busy. They don't have time to go every day to the market. Our lives have changed. Most people, are working, and we just need something that could be quick. And it's like, my thought is, what are only the options to do something from scratch that tastes great, or something quick that has empty calories and terrible taste? I felt like that could be another option. And that is where SOMOS came in. We focus on recipes that are 5 ingredients or less, that take less than 10 minutes to make. And we are at the center of that recipe. And that way, we want to be the pasta and sauce of Mexican food. We want everybody to be able, my 15-year-old son, he's been cooking pasta and sauce for 3 or 4 years, super easy to do. We want to make Mexican food that easy and that affordable for people that are third generation Hispanic or are just love Mexican culture and food.
And what year is it when you have the idea for SOMOS Foods? It's cemented. All right, we're gonna go for this Mexican at-home food product.
I would say that it was 2018.
Okay.
When we were having this conversation. It might have even been 2017, but around that time.
Okay, and then, a lot of time has passed since that, and when you actually hit the market, take me back to like that first step when you have this idea that you're passionate about, you think it's, there's a market for this. What's that first step you take to say, all right, let's start building this thing?
Well, the first thing was deciding what to do after Cholula. So, I called Daniel and, I told him I really wanted to do this project, that I wanted to do it with him. And he was very excited about it. And, the first thing was, well, we need a name, we need some recipes, and we need a team. That's really what it comes down to in food. And, Daniel, myself, and our wives, we came up with a list of probably 200 names that we would vote. And we ended up with SOMOS. Actually, Daniel's wife, we both married Americans. So it was like great. They were part of the conversations and names that would cross over culture. Daniel's wife came up with the name SOMOS. And Daniel loved it because we wanted a brand that would bring cultures together. And I loved it because it has a lot of symmetry. I think it would be a beautiful name to design in a bag or in a box. And that was step one. Step two, we're getting the recipes. So, we brought our third partner, Rodrigo Zuloaga, who we had brought at Kind. He was living in Guadalajara. He comes from a family of chefs. We couldn't have had, he's also a delight to work with. So we couldn't have been luckier for him on joining the project. And then it was time to hire the team. And like I just answered on the question, our first hire was operations, then sales, then finance, and then we were off to the races.
And I imagine it was smooth sailing throughout. Everything worked out just as you planned. Yeah. What
is the opposite of a smooth sailing?
Rocky ups and downs. Tell me about at the early stage before you even hit market. What were I don't know. What was one of the biggest dope? Why did I do that? Why did we do that? Tell me about some of those.
Yeah. Oh, so many. How much time do you have?
We got time.
But one of the bigger ones was we were launching this company in the middle of COVID. So Rodrigo would send us this food in boxes, to me at my house, to Daniel at his house. Rodrigo was in Mexico, and we said, why don't we just do a direct-to-consumer business? These boxes are great. We love getting them. So we tested direct to consumer in the middle of COVID. It tested amazing. So we're like, okay, this is what the business is going to be. And then COVID ended. Everybody went out. At that time, we were launching nationally. And it was very tough. It was a huge failure. Financially, it was brutal. To the team, culturally, it was really, really bad. And I remember having the conversation with Daniel, like maybe, this is devastating and maybe, this doesn't work out. But we thought about taking that assortment into Expo West and launch it in retail. It's going to be 2 years next month since we did that pivot. And retail ended up being an amazing home for SOMOS.
And that national launch, just give me some dates there. That must have been, was that 2021, end of 2021?
So we did the beta taste in September of 2021. And we were supposed to, I don't remember the exact numbers, but directionally, we were supposed to sell 5,000 cases the first month, and we sold 15,000 cases the first week. So we're like, oh, this is going to be great. So then we did the national launch 3 or 4 months later. And of course, everybody was out. Everybody was going to the grocery store. We could not give them away, Fernando. It was devastating.
And
we're sitting on 200,000 boxes in the warehouse.
It was this kind of swing of consumer behavior, I imagine. Obviously before COVID, it was, I think, it's hard to remember what it was, and you probably know this better, but I imagine it was a much more external life we lived. We went out, we went to restaurants, to the grocery store. Then everyone gets holed up, and then I remember the shipments of everything. Everything was being shipped. So that was kind of the consumer behavior you're working off. But then the time didn't quite add up. You launch, and then it's kind of a buzzkill there. But you pivot really quickly. And for people who aren't familiar, can you explain what Expo West is?
It's the largest trade show in the United States. So it's a food show in Anaheim, the second week of March. And there is close to 90,000 people that come to it. It's bigger than consumer electronics in Vegas. And you have about 9,000 to 10,000 different companies, that have a stand, that have their food. It's all natural products. And then you have all the retailers, everybody from, Whole Foods to Walmart to 7-Eleven to Albertsons to Sprouts. Costco is there. And, you can have this new brand like we did, with SOMOS, and all of a sudden be lucky enough to get the time with a buyer and get national distribution. It is a make or break event for us in the food industry.
And at a place like Expo West, how much are you also using those connections you made in your corporate career? And you also have, Daniel's connections. How much does that help a founder?
A ton. So that's, the ROI at Expo, the return on investment, happens in the weeks before Expo and not in the 3 days that you're at Expo. You need to execute with excellence. I'm very lucky. I've been doing Expo for, I think this is going to be my 12th or 13th Expo West. So we have a ton of experience, myself and the team. And then, like you said, we also have a ton of connections. So you have to think of us in that moment where direct to consumer didn't work. And now we have to pivot. And now, Daniel, myself, everybody in the team just reaching out to everybody that would pick up the phone and would give us an appointment at Expo. And we're lucky enough. We've been doing this for years. We have a great reputation in the market. I think people are willing to give us a chance. But the proof with food is when you try it. And I think the product was just incredible. Every meeting that we had, we sold the product in.
And tell me a little bit about those products. What products were you having people try at Expo West?
But we have our direct-to-consumer portfolio. So we had 2 rices, we had 2 beans, we had 3 salsas, we had other products that we've discontinued since, tortillas, tortilla chips, all the things that we were putting in those cases. It was a D2C portfolio. It was not a retail portfolio. Like you would never launch 2 rices by itself on a shelf where 200 competitors lie, but that's what we had. And, when you make these pivots, you gotta do the most of the cards that you were dealt, right? So that was what we were pitching everybody.
So you kind of had to maintain the catalog. You couldn't necessarily develop new recipes overnight per se, but you could change how you were presenting it.
Yeah, so we got tons of distribution. That number that you were mentioning on our first partial year, 6,000 stores, but it wasn't our best products. So we learned then what were the best items and what were the worst items. And I think, our best year was last year, and it really set us up really nicely for this year, because we ended up discontinuing everything that didn't work and then double down in the categories where we were being very successful.
And, what I love about your brand is that there is so much in the semantics and the wording of it. And the one particular product is picadillo. Tell us a little bit about that evolution that product saw and how you present that and tell the product story to a customer on a shelf.
Yeah, so our picadillo is actually my mom's recipe. So it's a, ground beef Mexican recipe that I would say is the basis of the Tex-Mex ground beef with taco seasoning, that has been so popular in the US. In Mexico, we do something very similar with, different seasoning and with vegetables. It can have carrots, it can have potatoes, it can have peas. And it is my favorite recipe that my mom makes. We, originally the first prototype, we had done it with beef, but the market in the US for shelf-stable beef does not exist. We tested it with customers and with consumers, and it's not there. Fernando, you might know, but in Mexico you can buy chilorio, shelf-stable, and, even pollo con mole, and it is just something that it's very common, but in the US it wasn't. So our idea was like, well, if the market is not open to this product, perhaps we should try it with plant-based. And we launched a plant-based. It's, chicharos, peas, that you turn into, plant-based protein, and then you cook it with tomato sauce and seasonings, and then you add, the carrots and the potatoes to make this picadillo. And we thought it would be super cute if we, instead of writing it the way that it's written, P-I-C-A, if we did P-E-A, because it's made, with peas. And, not only the market wasn't there, but we got a little too cute with the name, and consumers didn't understand it. Whoever understand it, like you and me that grew up eating picadillo, probably were not looking for plant-based foods in the Mexican aisle. And then the people that were looking for that didn't know what the product was. So if we talk about, do-overs or mistakes that we made, the product is fantastic. We eat it all the time, but the execution, I wish I could have a mulligan on that one.
SOMOS is still a very young company, so I imagine you're still maybe in hyperventilating mode a bit every now and then, but I imagine you're in a much different space, and hopefully you feel like you're in a much different space than when you're, that first D2C launch didn't go as planned. Is there a certain moment you can pinpoint where you kind of were able to breathe a little easier with SOMOS? Was there maybe a retail distribution point that really helped you guys out, or another moment that helped you see a little bit more of the light?
It was really the performance in store that really made a difference. I would say it was two things. When we launched our rices and we started getting data from our first accounts, and we were constantly in the top 5 and top 10 SKUs, I was like, you know what? We can build a business with rices. There are plenty of companies that are just rice. So we have a killer product, consumers love it, they buy it, they come back, they repeat it, and we make money on it. So, this would be a great business. And then when we launched cooking sauces, and like I told you, on a national test, they became the number 1 cooking sauce. And I saw consumers were willing to pay a little bit more for something that has much higher quality, that is when I was like, you know what, this is going to be very successful. I joke a lot with Laura, our COO, that we haven't talked about what are we going to do if this doesn't work out in like a year. We constantly would say, hey, what if SOMOS doesn't work out? What are we going to do? And we just haven't had that conversation in a while.
So you see some good runway. You see that vision. Where do you see SOMOS in 5 years if you had it your way?
Yeah, I think we continue to doing what we are doing. Right now we have these two, very successful, very productive ranges. What I would like to do is to get them in as many places as possible and continue to grow a strong community of people that connect to Mexico, to the best of Mexico through our food. And if I can do that in the next 5 years, I would say it was incredibly successful. I want to do this for a lot longer than that. I love the brand. I love my job. I love the team. So, in my head, we're going to continue until I retire. And then one day I will be gone and SOMOS will still be on the shelf.
All right. So, Miguel, now I want to go into a section we called Bísness 101. So I have some rapid fire questions, but I've started calling them slow fire because some of them take a little while to think about. My first question, what is your earliest money memory? When you first thought of, money as a concept, when you first learned that?
So I come from a family of entrepreneurs, and my grandfather had a factory. And I am bilingual. My family, came from Laredo, Texas. So we all grew up speaking English and Spanish. And my grandfather hired me when I was in my early teens to be a translator for people that were installing equipment at his factory. And it was on one side, great to see that I could, spend time doing something that I was enjoying and getting paid for doing that. It was transformative. But also during my translations, I was able to understand that my grandfather had placed a big bet on this technology, had bought this equipment, was hiring people, and he was betting that was going to be a big business for him. And I remember it was both like fearful and exciting at the same time, and a rush of adrenaline for me. And I was hooked.
I like that. If you had a business school course, what would it be called? So Miguel 101, :
I would call it performance marketing for brick and mortar. I think there are a lot of mistakes that are made in early companies, some that I've made and some that I see all the time, that can be explained between the relationship between repeat rates and gross margin. If you have a product that consumers will buy over and over again because it tastes great and you can make money every time that they buy it, marketing and distribution and all of that just takes care of itself.
What's the best business advice you've ever received?
The best business advice came from Daniel, and it was, don't build a company to sell it. Build a company that you want to own for many years. And I just love that. I think it completely changed my relationship to entrepreneurship.
All right, Miguel, thank you so much for coming by Bísness School. We really appreciate it.
Muchas gracias, Fernando. Un abrazo.